Welcome back to WebCertain TV. I'm Gemma Houghton. Today my guest is Stephane Hamel, a digital analytics consultant from Quebec in Canada, and today he's going to give us a little bit of insight into the Quebec market and Canada as a whole. So thank you very much for being here, Stephane.
Thank you. Bonjour.
Bonjour. So of course, most people should know that Quebec is the French-speaking part of Canada.
Yeah, indeed.
And there's obviously also quite a large English-speaking part.
Mm-hmm.
So how big are the differences between these two areas of Canada?
It's interesting because some people think that Canada is just like another state from the U.S., right? But there's big differences in culture, in values and stuff like that. And on the other hand, when you look at the French-speaking part of the country, some people think, that's really just like France. But it's very different. Yeah. So we're always in between, and we really represent a small market in North America and globally. Like there's, maybe 8 or 9 million people in Quebec out of about 30 million people in Canada. And Canada is such a big country, like 30 million people in Canada, that's nothing.
There's a lot of space.
There's a lot of space, yeah. From a business standpoint, it creates interesting challenges because the local market obviously is pretty small. So a lot of the companies in Quebec are doing business, in the rest of Canada or in the States and Europe and so on. And from, I would say, from a digital analytics standpoint, also what it creates is I go to a lot of different conferences, and when I go to the States, you hear about those flagship companies that have teams of 50 analysts or more, and they are, they have great tools and super interesting. But in the States, there's like 300 million people, something like that. Canada as a whole is about a tenth of that.
Yeah.
So where you have a large organization with a team of 10 analysts, if you consider the Canadian market, you would have one analyst. So it creates challenges in terms of how effective you can be at optimizing your business, finding resources, and then if you bring that into the Quebec market, it's super small. So a lot of the companies in the local market, they don't even have any analysts. They rely on external resources, and the same for their marketing strategy and tactics and the execution of their marketing strategies. Of course, you have banks and insurance and stuff like that are bigger and they have their team, but for the most part, there's still a lot of difference between the capabilities of the local market versus the global aspect.
And how does that translate, or how does that affect a business maybe from the States or from the UK or Europe or anywhere, really targeting Canada and targeting the Quebec region itself? What do you need to do differently to be successful there?
Yeah, that's a good point. One of the most common mistake is either taking a US commercial and trying to just push that in the Canadian market in general or the Quebec market. It's even worse because there's a lot of there's just too many cultural difference between the values and stuff like that. Yeah. Conversely, taking a commercial that would have been made for France and just throwing that in a Quebec market would be also a big mistake because there beyond the French accent, there's other aspects that are different, right?
I mean, in terms of the language itself, it's not the same, is it? It's obviously French, but it's a different version, different dialect.
Funny story is sometimes I go to France and I speak in French,
they don't understand.
and they don't understand and they reply in English, because they think I'm trying to speak French, and then there's all the jokes around that and everything. But the language is different just as much as the language is different between American English and UK and Australia and South Africa, for example. You can manage to understand what it means, but there's always subtle difference. So if you're careful, you try to speak, international English or international French, and like in the movies, for example, we get, usually international French, and it's fine.
However, if as a business you're trying to really appeal to a Quebec audience, then doing so by sending content that you created initially for France is probably not going to be very effective.
Well, at least if there's a good adaptation or translation of it.
It needs to be.
But it depends. I guess it depends on the business also, or what you're trying to sell. Some things are just naturally, it doesn't really matter, right? But if you try to be very, very local, then I guess it's better to adapt the content, just like you would for any market. Like advertising and marketing in the UK is different from what you would do in France or in Greece or Italy and so on.
Yeah. And just because the language is similar or shared doesn't mean that you should just lump them all together.
Yes. Yeah.
And what about English in Quebec? Is it spoken? Is it possible to reach people with English in that region, or is that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, especially Montreal is kind of the biggest city in Quebec, and you can get along everywhere in English very easily. Of course, when you go to the countryside, and it has its own charm. So it's interesting. Yeah.
And if you're trying to reach the consumers in that market online, even in Montreal, would they look at English websites happily in English content, or would they be expecting it in French?
No. The people are used to consume content, which in English, which is a bit of a struggle in a way, because of course there are, from a cultural aspect, they would prefer if a lot of content was available in French and produced locally and stuff like that, just like anywhere else in the world where you open the TV and you see all those shows coming from either the States or other places.
So really the key message, I guess, is that it's possible to succeed with English, with international French, but if you really want to stand out, if you want to make those customers in that region sit up and think, oh wow, this company's interested in us, go as local as you can. Yeah, just like anywhere else in the world. Yeah. Great. Well, that was interesting. Thank you for talking to us. Thank you. My pleasure.